The colony ship Baekdu tumbled through the black nothing of space like a dying bird. Inside, alarms screamed their warnings, while red emergency lights painted everything the color of blood. 3,000 humans lived on this ship, and now they were all going to die far from home. Commander. Do-Yoon Park gripped his chair as another explosion rocked the bridge. The main engine was gone. Life support was failing. They had maybe 3 days of air left, and no one was coming to help them. Out here, past the edge of map space, they were alone. Another system just went offline, Chief Engineer Myrae Choi said. Her voice was steady, but Do-Yoon could see the fear in her eyes. She had worked for 18 hours straight trying to save the ship. Nothing was working. Do-Yoon looked at the faces of his crew. Young people, mostly. They had signed up to build a new world, not to die in the darkness between stars. He wanted to tell them everything would be fine. He wanted to lie. But commanders did not lie to their people. Keep working, he said instead. Every minute we buy is another minute for a miracle. The miracle came 2 days later, but it did not look like salvation. The ship that found them was strange. Its hull was covered in what looked like organic shell, brown and rough like tree bark. It moved with odd jerking motions, nothing like the smooth ships humans built. When it appeared on their dying scanners, half the crew thought they were hallucinating from oxygen deprivation. Unknown vessel approaching, the communications officer croaked. They're hailing us. The face that appeared on screen made several crew members gasp. It looked like an insect that had grown to human size and learned to stand upright. 4 eyes, mandibles that clicked when it spoke, and 6 arms that moved independently. The translation program struggled with the language. I am Thixon, the creature said. Valkyrie merchant captain. Your ship is dying. It was not a question. Do-Yoon nodded slowly. Yes, our engine exploded. We have maybe 1 day of air left. Thixon's mandibles clicked rapidly. His crew was visible behind him, dozens of insect-like beings moving frantically. This is not authorized space. You are unknown species. My government says do not help unknown species. Daehan's heart sank. So this was how it would end. Found by aliens who could save them, but wouldn't. I understand. Thank you for stopping. I did not say I would not help, Thixon interrupted. I said my government says do not help. But my clan, we remember being lost once. We remember no one came. His eyes seemed to focus on something far away. Governments forget. But that's we remember. What happened next would be recorded in both human and Valkyrie history, though for very different reasons. Thixon's ship latched onto the Baekdu like a mother carrying a wounded child. His crew swarmed through the human ship, their 6 arms perfect for the emergency repairs needed. They worked with desperate speed, knowing that both ships were now in danger. Helping an unregistered species was illegal. Being caught would mean punishment for Thixon's entire clan. Myrae worked alongside the Valkyrie engineers, learning their strange tools and methods. Why are you doing this? She asked one of them during a brief rest. Your captain said it's illegal. The Valkyrie engineer's mandibles clicked softly. Thixon says some laws are smaller than some debts. He says life debt is biggest debt. 3 days of frantic work followed. The Valkyrie pulled resources from their own ship, cutting into their profit margin and reserve supplies. They fabricated parts that humans needed but could not make. They shared food that tasted strange, but kept the colonists alive. They gave air and power and hoped that, when it was done, the Baekdu could fly again. Not well, but enough to reach human space. Enough to live. Do-Yoon found Thixon in the cargo bay where the Valkyrie had set up their temporary command post. The alien captain looked exhausted, his antennae drooping. I don't know how to thank you, Do-Yoon said. You saved 3,000 lives. You risked your own people. What can we possibly give you in return? Thixin made a sound like wind through leaves. Laughter. Goyun would learn later. You have nothing we need. You are new to Galaxy. Weak. No trade goods, no influence, no power. He paused. But I asked for promise instead. Anything, Goyun said, and meant it. My people, the Valkyrie, we are small in Galaxy. Weak. No one protects us. Maybe someday we need help like you need now. If that day comes, if we call to you, will you remember this? Will you come? Do-hyun felt the weight of those words settle on his shoulders. He thought about the 3,000 people sleeping safely now because this alien had broken his own government's laws. He thought about Marie's children, alive because Thixin had chosen compassion over caution. He thought about debts that could never truly be repaid. I promise you, Do-hyun said, his voice formal and heavy with meaning. Humanity will remember. If you call us, we will come. No matter how long it takes. No matter what it costs. We will come. Thixin's mandibles clicked rapidly, clearly not believing the promise truly meant anything. Humans were primitives, barely into space. What help could they ever be? But he appreciated the sentiment. From his belt, he produced a small crystal data storage device. Take this. It has our genetic signature, our history, our location. If we need you, we broadcast this code. Maybe you hear it. Maybe you remember. His tone suggested he thought neither was likely. Do-hyun took the crystal. It was warm to the touch. We will remember. The Valkyrie ships departed, jumping away to deliver their diminished cargo and face whatever punishment awaited them. Do-hyun stood at the viewport, watching them disappear into the streaks of faster-than-light travel. Do you really think we'll ever see them again? Mireille asked, standing beside him. I don't know, Do-hyun admitted. But I meant what I said. If they call, we come. Mireille nodded slowly. Then we better make sure humanity survives long enough to keep that promise. The Baekdu limped home. The colonists survived to build their new world. Do-hyun Park's name went into the history books as the commander who brought his people through disaster. But the crystal and its promise were filed away in a museum, labeled simply as first contact gift from Valkyrie species. Most people who saw it never knew the story. Never knew the promise. 847 years passed. Empires rose and fell across the galaxy. The Valkyrie people were conquered by the Torvian Empire, absorbed and scattered across a dozen worlds as slave labor. Their history was erased, their culture suppressed. They became a footnote in galactic politics, a conquered species among hundreds. But deep in Earth's oldest museum, in a climate-controlled vault, a crystal waited. And humanity, spreading across the stars and growing strong, had perfect records. They never forgot anything that was written down. The galaxy would learn this truth the hard way. Humans remembered their debts. All of them. Forever. Young Wunam was not supposed to be in the old archives. The Torvian Empire had declared them off-limits 3 generations ago, when they decided the Valkyrie people needed no history except the one their masters gave them. But Hyunwoo was young and stubborn, and he believed his people deserved to remember who they were. The archive building squatted in the old quarter of the capital city like a forgotten tomb. Hyunwoo slipped through a broken window, his 6 arms making the climb easier than it would be for most species. Inside, dust covered everything. The Torvians did not care about Valkyrie records. They only cared about the minerals the Valkyrie dug from their own planets. For 3 weeks, Hyunwoo came to the archives whenever he could escape his work shift at the processing plant. He scanned old documents, learning about Valkyrie history that no school was allowed to teach. He learned about the merchant fleets that once traveled the galaxy. He learned about the brief time when his people were free. Then he found the file marked Thixin Incident. The report was 800 years old, A merchant captain had violated protocol by helping an unknown species. He had been punished, his trading license revoked, his clan fined heavily. But the report included something else. A copy of the promise he had extracted from the humans, a genetic code, a broadcast frequency. Hyunwoo's hands trembled as he read. Humans. He knew about humans. Everyone in the galaxy did now. In 800 years, they had grown from a primitive species barely capable of interstellar flight into one of the major powers. They were not the strongest or the largest, but they were known for their stubbornness, their refusal to surrender, their strange codes of behavior. Could they possibly remember a promise from so long ago? It seemed impossible. What species tracked debts for 8 centuries? But what if they did? Hyunwoo thought about his sister, worked to death in the lithium mines when she was only 23. He thought about his parents, taken for relocation to an industrial world where Valkyrie died by the thousands from toxic exposure. He thought about every Valkyrie who had forgotten they were once a free people with their own ships and their own dreams. He made his decision. Getting the crystal from the museum was harder than accessing the archives. The Torvians kept closer watch on physical artifacts they could sell to collectors. But Hyunwoo had friends, young Valkyrie who were tired of being slaves. They created a distraction. Hyunwoo slipped into the back rooms where lesser artifacts were stored in bins like garbage. The crystal was labeled Primitive Alien Artifact. Origin unknown, no value. The Torvians had no idea what it was. Hyunwoo held it in his hands and felt the weight of history, the weight of a promise. 3 nights later, in an abandoned communication station on the edge of the city, Hyunwoo activated the crystal. He had no idea if it would still work. 800 years was a long time for any technology, but the crystal began to glow, pulsing with a soft blue light. The broadcast code embedded in the crystal began transmitting. A signal, pushing out into space at the speed of light, carrying the genetic signature of the Valkyrie. People and one simple message repeated in the ancient human language recorded in the crystal. We call the dead. We need you. Please remember. Hyunwoo sat in the dark station, watching the crystal pulse, and wondered if he had just wasted his last hope, or started something that would change everything. The signal reached Earth's orbital command station 17 days later. Admiral Ji-won Kang was reviewing fleet deployment schedules when her communications officer interrupted the morning briefing. Admiral, you need to see this. It's flagged as historical priority. Ji-won frowned. Historical priority was a classification she had never actually seen used. It meant something tied to events more than 500 years old. Show me. The signal played. The genetic code. The frequency. The message in ancient standard English. The language humans had spoken before the common galactic tongue. Get me the historical database, Ji-won said quietly. Search for Valkyrie. Search for promises. Search for Doyen Park. It took 3 hours for the AI to compile the complete record. When Jaewon read it, she sat back in her chair and stared at nothing for a long moment. Ma'am? Her communications officer asked. Get me the president, Ji-won said. Now. And someone pull the current intelligence on the Torvian Empire and the Valkyrie homeworlds. I want everything we have. President Taijin-Oh listened to the briefing in his office, surrounded by advisors, who grew more agitated as they understood what the admiral was suggesting. With respect, Mr. President, one of the advisors said, this promise is 800 years old. Commander Park has been dead for centuries. No one expects us to honor this. Did he make the promise on behalf of himself or on behalf of humanity? Taijin asked quietly. The advisor hesitated. The record says he promised that humanity would come if called. Then the promise was made by humanity, not by a dead man. Taijin looked at Ji-won. What's the situation with the Valkyrie now? Conquered by the Torvian Empire 200 years ago. Their population has been reduced by 60% through forced labor and industrial accidents. They have no autonomy, no representation in the Galactic Council, no rights. They're slaves in everything but name. And the Torvians? Third largest military in the galaxy. 47 systems under direct control. 16 vassal species. They're a council member in good standing. Any interference in their internal affairs would be considered an act of war. The room went silent. One of the advisors laughed nervously. Surely we're not actually considering starting a war over an 800-year-old, promised to a species we've had no contact with. Taijin stood and walked to the window. Earth turned below, blue and green and beautiful. My grandfather told me a story once about his grandfather, who borrowed money from a neighbor during hard times, promised to pay it back, then won the lottery. His friends told him the neighbor didn't need the money anymore, that he should forget about it. He paid it back anyway, with interest. You know why? No one answered. Because he said a man who doesn't keep his word isn't a man. He's just meat pretending. Taijin turned back to face them. What's true for a man is true for a species. We made a promise. Someone called the debt. The galaxy is watching to see what kind of species we are. Mr. President, another advisor tried. The cost will be enormous. I know. Taijin's voice was steady. Admiral Kang, begin mobilization protocols. I want an assessment of our military capabilities versus the Torvian Empire. Full strategic analysis. And someone find me everything we can about the current location and status of the Volcari people. Sir, the Galactic Council will be informed that humanity intends to honor a debt. They can approve or they can watch. But we will not ask permission to keep our word. Jiwan saluted. Yes, sir. And the person who sent the signal? Taijin smiled grimly. Find them if you can. Let them know we heard them. Let them know we remember. Let them know we're coming. The message reached Himwu 3 weeks later, transmitted on a type beam that the Torvians would never detect. It was in simple trade language, brief and direct. We remember. We are coming. Stay alive. Humanity keeps its promises. Yunwu read it 7 times, not quite believing. Then he began to cry, his mandibles clicking in the Volcari expression of overwhelming emotion. He was not alone in the old communication station. Dozens of young Volcari had gathered there, hoping, not quite believing. They remember, Hilmu said, his voice shaking. After 800 years, they remember. The news spread through the Volcari underground like fire through dry grass. The humans were coming. The humans remembered. The impossible was happening. The Torvian overseers noticed their workers seemed different. More defiant, less broken. They increased security and punishments, but they could not stop whispers traveling in the night. Hope, once awakened, is almost impossible to kill. And in orbit above Earth, the largest mobilization in human history began. Ambassador Sojin Lee stood before the Galactic Council and felt the weight of 300 pairs of eyes watching her. The council chamber was massive, designed to hold representatives from every species in the known galaxy. Most of them were looking at her like she had lost her mind. Let me be clear, she said, her voice carrying through the translation systems to every delegate. Humanity is formally demanding the immediate and complete liberation of the Volcari people from Torvian control. The chamber erupted in noise. Delegates shouted over each other in dozens of languages. The Torvian delegation, massive reptilian beings in ornate armor, sat perfectly still. Their stillness was somehow more threatening than any outburst. The council speaker, a floating gas being from the ethereal collective, called for order. Ambassador Ali, you understand this is an internal matter of the Torvian Empire. The Volcari worlds were legally incorporated 200 years ago through conquest. This is recognized under galactic law. We understand the law. Sojin replied calmly. We also understand honor, and debt, and promises that don't expire just because time passes. Torvian Chancellor Morvex rose to his full 3-meter height. When he spoke, his voice was like rocks grinding together. The human ambassador speaks of matters 800 years old. Ancient history. No species in this council would honor such a claim. It is absurd, is it? Sojin looked around the chamber. How many of you have honored trade agreements lasting that long? How many of your species track property deeds and family inheritances across centuries? You honor the debts you care about. We honor all of them. A delegate from the Crystalline Harmony spoke up, its voice chiming like bells. Even if we accept your moral position, what you propose is war. The Torvian Empire controls 47 systems. You are demanding they surrender an entire conquered species. Do you understand what you're asking? Yes, Sojin said simply. We're asking them to do the right thing. We expect they'll refuse. So we're prepared to make them. Morvex laughed, a sound like an avalanche. You are prepared? Humanity controls 31 systems. You have a respectable fleet, yes. But we are the third largest military power in the galaxy. You would be crushed. Is this ancient promise worth national suicide? Sojin met his eyes without flinching. Ask us again after the war. The vote was 127-3 against human intervention. Only humanity, the Valkyrie themselves, and surprisingly, the Small Preservation Alliance voted in favor. The rest of the galaxy made it clear. They would not support what they saw as human aggression. Against a council member, Sojin delivered humanity's response that same day. As of this moment, humanity withdraws from the Galactic Council. We will honor our existing trade agreements and diplomatic relations with individual species. But we will not be part of a body that values law over justice or paperwork over lives. When you decide that honor matters more than convenience, we'll be happy to return. She walked out of the chamber while delegates were still shouting questions on Earth. Fleet Admiral Junho Han stood in the command center watching the largest gathering of human ships in history. 600 warships hung in space around the orbital stations. Every vessel humanity could deploy without leaving their own systems completely defenseless. It's not enough, his strategic officer said quietly. The Torvians have over 2,000 ships. Their individual vessels are larger and better armed than ours. The math doesn't work, Admiral. Then, we don't fight their kind of war, Junho said. Pull up everything we have on Torvian fleet doctrine. Every battle they fought. Every tactic they use. I want to know how they think. For 3 weeks, human military planners tore apart centuries of Torvian military history. They found patterns. The Torvians fought like they did everything else, with overwhelming force and direct assault. They won through strength, not cleverness. Their tactics hadn't changed significantly in 400 years. They're used to fighting species that play by galactic rules, Junho said, during the final strategy meeting. Formal declarations. Fleet engagements at predetermined locations. Honor duels in space. That's not how we're going to fight. Colonel Minho Quan commanded the Special Assault Corps, 10,000 soldiers trained for ground combat. He studied the maps of Valkyrie worlds with growing concern. These aren't military targets. These are labor camps, factories, civilian populations mixed with industrial sites. Any orbital bombardment will kill millions of Valkyrie. Then, we don't use orbital bombardment, Junho said. We go down there and take the planets back piece by piece. That will take months, years, and cost thousands of lives. Yes, Junho agreed. But we promise to free them, not to kill them with friendly fire. We do this right, or we don't do it at all. On Earth, the economic impact of mobilization was already being felt. Economist Una Park presented her findings to President Taijin O in a closed session. Mr. President, I need to be direct. This war will bankrupt us. We're pulling resources from every sector. Trade routes are disrupted because merchants are afraid to deal with us. The Galactic Credit Exchange has already devalued human currency by 30%. If this war lasts more than 2 years, we're looking at economic collapse. Taijin studied the charts she had brought. The numbers were brutal. How many years of development will we lose? Conservative estimate? 30 years. We'll be set back to where we were a generation ago. All our progress gone. And if we don't fight? Una was quiet for a moment. We save our economy. We maintain our position in the galaxy. We continue to grow and prosper. And what do we tell our children when they ask what we did when someone called in a debt we owed? Taijin looked up from the charts. How do we explain that we were the kind of species that keeps promises only when it's convenient? I don't have an economic model for honor, Mr. President. I know. That's because honor doesn't show up on balance sheets. It shows up in whether people trust you, whether your word means anything, whether you're worth knowing. He signed the budget authorization. We'll pay the price. Future generations can decide if it was worth it. The fleet began its journey toward Torvian space 3 days later. Junho sent one final message to the Torvian Empire before the ships jumped to faster-than-light speed. To the Torvian Empire, we are coming for the Valkyrie people. Release them voluntarily, and there will be no conflict. Continue to hold them, and we will take them back by force. You have committed no crime against humanity, and we bear you no hatred. But 800 years ago, your victims saved us when no one else would. We pay our debts. Choose wisely. The response from Chancellor Morvex came within hours. Come then, foolish humans. We will teach you the price of interfering in the affairs of your betters. Your ships will burn. Your soldiers will die. And when you beg for mercy, we will show you the same compassion you show us now. None. The Valkyrie are ours by right of conquest. They will remain ours. And soon, we will add human worlds to our empire. Junho read the message aloud to his senior staff. When he finished, there was silence in the room. Well, he said finally, I suppose negotiation is off the table. Tactical team, begin implementing Phase 1. We hit their border outposts first. Make them think we're going for a conventional campaign. And someone get me everything we can on guerrilla warfare. If they want a straight fight, we'll give them everything but that. On the Valkyrie homeworld, Hyun-woo and his network of resistance fighters prepared for what was coming. They had no weapons, no training, and no real hope of fighting the Torvian garrison. But they could gather intelligence. They could sabotage infrastructure. They could slow the Torvians down when the humans arrived. If the humans arrived, Hyun-woo tried not to think about what would happen if the humans lost. The Torvians would make examples of every Valkyrie who had hoped for freedom. The reprisals would be brutal beyond imagining. But he also tried not to think about what it meant that somewhere in space, humans he had never met were risking everything for a promise made before his species was even conquered. It was too big to understand. Too strange. Too human. So he focused on the simple things. Maps of garrison locations, schedules of patrol rotations, weak points in the security systems. When the humans came, his people would be ready to help however they could. The galaxy watched and waited. Most species expected the war to be over in weeks. The Torvians were simply too strong, too experienced, too large. But they had never fought humans before. And they did not understand what humanity looked like when it fought for something it believed in rather than something it wanted. They were about to learn. The galaxy was about to learn. And the lesson would be written in fire across a dozen worlds. The war began with a single human destroyer jumping into a Torvian border system and broadcasting one message before opening fire. "We're here for our friends. Get out of the way or get removed." The galaxy would remember this moment as the day humanity showed its true face. Not conquerors, not merchants, not explorers, but something older and more dangerous, protectors, who would cross any distance and pay any price for those they called their own. The Battle of Frontier Station 7 lasted exactly 14 minutes. This shocked the galaxy, which had expected the well-defended Torvian outpost to hold for days against the human fleet. What shocked them more was how the humans won. Fleet. Admiral Junho Han did not send his ships in a traditional formation. He did not broadcast formal challenges or give the Torvians time to prepare their defenses. He simply jumped his fastest destroyers into 3 locations simultaneously, targeting the station's communication arrays before the Torvians even understood they were under attack. By the time the station's commander realized what was happening, he was cut off from the rest of the Empire and facing ships that moved in patterns no Torvian tactical computer could predict. The humans fainted, retreated, circled back, and struck from angles that made no sense according to conventional galactic warfare. The station surrendered. Junho's terms were simple. The Torvian garrison could leave unharmed, or they could die defending a position that no longer mattered. They left. The humans took the station, downloaded every piece of intelligence they could find, and then destroyed it completely before jumping away. The Torvian fleet arrived 6 hours later to find wreckage and a message buoy. "We don't want your stations. We want our friends. 5 more outposts will fall before you can respond to this message. Choose better." Chancellor Morvax watched the tactical reports with growing frustration. The humans were not fighting like any species he had ever encountered. They refused to hold territory. They refused to engage in direct fleet battles. They hit supply lines, communication hubs, and isolated patrols, then vanished before reinforcements could arrive. "They fight like vermin," he snarled to his admirals. "No honor, no courage. They strike and run." "They're fighting smart," one of his younger officers dared to say. "They know they can't match us ship for ship, so they're not trying to." Morvex had the officer removed from command for defeatist talk. But the words haunted him, because they were true. The first ground assault came 3 weeks into the war. The Torvian industrial world of Kelvar Minor held 15,000 Velkari workers in conditions barely better than death. Colonel Minho Kwan's assault ships dropped through the atmosphere in the middle of the night, landing not at the main garrison, but at 12 scattered points across the factory complex. The Torvian commander did what his training dictated. He consolidated his forces to defend the command center. This is exactly what Minho had expected. While the Torvians prepared for an assault that never came, human special forces teams moved through the factory districts, cutting fences and opening doors. "We're here to take you home," they told the shocked Velkari workers in carefully practiced trade language. "We need you to run. Now, don't stop. Don't look back. Run to the ships." Some Velkari thought it was a trick. Some thought they were hallucinating. But Hayamu's resistance network had spread word that the humans were coming, and many believed. They ran dot by the time the Torvian commander understood what was happening. 10,000 Velkari were boarding human transport ships. The humans hadn't come to capture the facility. They had come to empty it of slaves. Minho soldiers held the perimeter just long enough for the transports to lift off, then retreated in good order. The Torvians retook the facility within hours, but it didn't matter. The Velkari were gone. The next day, the freed Velkari appeared in a broadcast across the galaxy. They told their stories. They showed the scars from industrial accidents and beatings. They thanked the humans who had risked their lives for people they had never met. Public opinion in the galaxy began to shift. Slowly at first, then faster. Other conquered species watched and wondered. Would anyone come for them? Would anyone remember if they had helped someone centuries ago? Captain Yoonji Kim commanded the destroyer Gwangju. She was 32 years old and had never expected to die young. But when her sensors detected a Torvian battle group moving to intercept a convoy of Valkyrie refugees fleeing a contested world, she understood what had to be done. "All ships, this is Gwangju," she broadcast to the convoy. "Continue on your current heading. Do not slow down. Do not stop." Her tactical officer looked at her with wide eyes. "Captain, that's a battle group. We can't fight them alone." "We don't have to win," Yoonji said calmly. "We just have to buy time. Helm, intercept course. Maximum speed. Weapons arm everything we have." The Gwangju burned hard toward the Torvian battle group, a single destroyer against 6 heavy cruisers and a dreadnought. It was suicide, and everyone on the ship knew it. But they also knew what they were protecting: 40,000 Valkyrie civilians who would be slaughtered if the Torvians caught them. "This is Captain Yoonji Kim of the Human Defense Force," she broadcast to the Torvians. "You want those refugees? You go through me first." The battle lasted 7 minutes. The Gwangju fought like a cornered animal, targeting sensors and engines, making every shot count. Yoonji kept her ship between the battle group and the fleeing convoy, dodging and weaving, taking hits that would have destroyed a lesser vessel. When the reactor went critical, she had time for one final transmission. "Convoy, you're clear. Run fast. Run far. Tell our people we did our job." The Gwangju exploded in a flash of light visible from the refugee ships. All 342 crew members died. But the convoy escaped, carrying stories of the human captain who had sacrificed everything to save people she had never met. Yoonji became a legend overnight. Valkyrie parents named their children after her. Human recruitment stations were overwhelmed with volunteers. And the galaxy began to understand humans would die for this. They weren't bluffing. They weren't negotiating. They were all in. The war ground on for 18 months. Neither side was winning in the traditional sense. The Torvians still held most of the Valkyrie worlds, but their control was slipping. Human raids freed thousands of Valkyrie every week. Supply lines were disrupted. Garrisons had to be reinforced. The cost of occupation was rising daily, but humanity was bleeding too. Every ship lost was irreplaceable. Every soldier who died left a hole that could not be filled. The economic projections Unipark had warned about were coming true. Human space was running out of resources, running out of money, running out of everything except determination. The Battle of Valkyrie Prime was supposed to be the turning point. Chancellor Morvex committed a full third of his fleet to crushing the human presence in the system. Admiral Junho knew he was outnumbered 3-1. But he also knew that billions of Valkyrie civilians were on the planet below, and Minhos. Ground forces were in the middle of the largest evacuation operation of the war. "We hold orbit for 48 hours, Junho told his captains. "That's how long Minho needs to get the civilians out. After that, we can retreat, but not before." The battle was brutal. Human ships fought in rotating formations, always moving, never giving the Torvians a stationary target. They used the planet's gravity well and orbital debris as cover. They sacrificed damaged ships as decoys to protect the rest of the fleet. Below, Minho's soldiers moved through cities under bombardment, gathering Valkyrie civilians and herding them to transport ships. Ionwu's resistance fighters guided them through safe routes, fought rearguard actions against Torvian ground forces, and died buying minutes for their people to escape. When the 48th hour arrived, 2 million Valkyrie had been evacuated. Junho had lost a third of his fleet, but they had done it. The civilians were safe as the human ships began their retreat, jumping system by system back toward friendly space. Something unexpected happened. A Valkyrie transport, one of the old Merchant vessels that Hai and Wu's people had hidden from the Torvians for 2 centuries refused to leave. The captain was Victhal, great-grandson of Thixon, the merchant who had saved the Baekdu all those centuries ago. He broadcast to the retreating human fleet, "My great-grandfather saved you when you needed it. You came for us when we called. Now we fight together. The Valkyrie are not just victims anymore. We are your allies." More ships appeared. Hidden vessels. Smuggler ships. Anything the Valkyrie resistance had managed to keep from Torvian control. They were old, poorly armed, and barely functional. But there were dozens of them, and they were crewed by people who had nothing left to lose. The human fleet suddenly wasn't fighting alone anymore. Chancellor Morvex stared at the tactical displays showing Valkyrie ships fighting alongside the humans and felt something he had rarely experienced: uncertainty. This wasn't how wars worked. Conquered people stayed conquered. They didn't rise up. They didn't fight back. They certainly didn't risk their lives for aliens. But more than that, he saw the casualty reports from 17 other systems where Torvian garrisons were facing sudden uprisings. Not just Valkyrie. Other conquered species were rebelling. The humans had shown them it was possible. Had shown them that someone might actually care about their freedom. The Torvian Empire was starting to crack. Not from external pressure alone, but from within. And Morvex realized, too late, that the humans had never been fighting just to free the Valkyrie. They had been fighting to prove that freedom was worth fighting for, that some debts were worth any price, and that the galaxy could be different than it was. The war was far from over, but the outcome was no longer certain. And in war, uncertainty was often the first step toward defeat. The end came not with a final battle, but with a revolution that spread across 17 systems in 6 days. Chancellor Morvex watched his empire crumble on screens that showed too many fires to count. Species he had conquered decades ago were throwing off their chains. Ships he had thought loyal were defecting. Governors were abandoning their posts rather than face populations that suddenly believed they could win their freedom. The humans had done this. Not through superior firepower, though they had proven surprisingly difficult to defeat. Not through economic pressure or diplomatic maneuvering. They had done it through the simple act of showing conquered peoples that someone cared whether they lived or died. "It's over," his senior military advisor said quietly. The officer was old, had served the Empire for 50 years, and had never admitted defeat before. "We've lost more ships to defection than to combat in the last month. The Valkyrie systems are in full rebellion. The garrison on Valkyrie Prime is besieged. And 17 other species are rising up because they saw what happened when the humans came for their friends. We still have the largest fleet in this sector," Morvex said. But his voice lacked conviction. "We do. And if we commit everything to crushing these rebellions, we might succeed. But it would take decades, cost millions of lives, destroy the very resources we wanted to exploit. And the humans would keep fighting us the entire time, bleeding us with raids and ambushes." The advisor paused. "We have already lost, Chancellor. The only question is how much more we destroy before admitting it." Morvex wanted to rage. Wanted to order one final assault, one devastating strike that would remind the galaxy why they feared the Torvian Empire. But he was old enough to recognize when pride was leading him toward catastrophe. "Contact the Galactic Council," he said finally. "Tell them we are willing to negotiate." The Treaty of New Seoul took 3 months to negotiate. Ambassador Sojin Lee sat across from Torvian delegates in a neutral station, with representatives from the Galactic Council mediating. President Taijin O had given her clear instructions. Get the Valkyrie their freedom. Everything else is negotiable. The final terms were announced simultaneously across the galaxy. The Valkyrie people would receive complete independence and recognition as a sovereign species. All Valkyrie held in Torvian territory would be released immediately and provided transport home. The Torvian Empire would pay reparations for 2 centuries of forced labor, calculated based on the economic output extracted from Valkyrie workers. And most controversially, the treaty established the debt of honor principle in galactic law. Any species could register a formal debt of honor with humanity for acts of genuine rescue or salvation. These debts would be tracked in perpetuity and could be called in at any time. Humanity pledged to respond to such calls regardless of cost or political convenience. "This is insane," one of the council delegates protested. "You're creating a legal framework for unlimited military intervention anywhere in the galaxy." "No," Sojin corrected. "We're creating a framework where saving lives matters, where compassion has value, where people can't just forget who helped them when it becomes inconvenient." She looked around the table. "And if you think that's dangerous, ask yourself why." The galaxy was divided in its reaction. Some species saw the treaty as humanity overreaching, establishing themselves as self-appointed protectors who could ignore sovereignty whenever they claimed that existed. Others saw it as the most hopeful thing to happen to galactic politics in centuries. Proof that someone would fight for the powerless. What no one could argue was the cost. Humanity had paid. Admiral Jiwon Kang stood in the memorial hall on Earth, looking at the names carved into black stone. 43,000 human soldiers, sailors, and support personnel had died in the war. Another 100,000 were wounded. The economic damage would take 30 years to repair, just as Yuna Park had predicted. President Taijin O joined her at the memorial wall. He looked older than he had 2 years ago when the war started. The weight of command had carved new lines into his face. Was it worth it? He asked quietly. G1 thought about Captain Yoonji Kim, who had sacrificed her ship and crew to save refugees. She thought about the soldiers who had fought on Valkyrie Prime, holding the line so civilians could escape. She thought about the fleet personnel who would never see their families again. "I don't know," she admitted. "Ask me in 800 years." A sound made them turn. A young Valkyrie stood at the entrance to the memorial hall, clearly nervous. The child couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old by human standards. In its 6 hands, it held a bundle of flowers. "Excuse me," the child said in carefully practiced standard. "My teacher said this is where we honor the humans who saved us. Can I leave flowers?" Taijin knelt down to the child's level. "Of course. Do you know why you're leaving flowers? Because humans came for us when no one else would. Because Captain Yoonji died so my family can escape. Because..." The child struggled for words. "Because you remembered." The child placed the flowers at the base of the memorial and carefully saluted in the human style, clearly taught by someone. Then it turned and ran back to a group of Valkyrie adults waiting outside. G1 looked at the flowers, then at the names on the wall. "Maybe we should ask them," she said, gesturing to the memorial. "The ones who paid the price. Would they think it was worth it?" "I think they already answered that question when they volunteered," Taijin said. "Every single one of them knew the cost, knew the odds. And they went anyway because they believe some things matter more than survival." The ceremony 3 days later marked the formal recognition of Valkyrie sovereignty. Vigthal, commanding what remained of the Valkyrie merchant fleet, stood beside G1 as both species' flags were raised at Galactic Council headquarters. After 200 years, the Valkyrie were a recognized nation again. "My great-grandfather saved 3,000 humans from death in space," Vigthal said. "Your species saved 3 billion Valkyrie from slavery and extinction. I don't know how we can ever repay this debt." "You don't," G1 said simply. "That's not how this works. Your great-grandfather didn't save those people because he expected payment. He did it because it was right. We did the same. If someday we need help and you can provide it, I'm sure you will. But we don't keep balance sheets on this kind of thing. The galaxy doesn't understand you, Victhal observed. They think you're either fools or calculating something they can't see. Let them wonder, Jiwan smiled. Maybe it's good for them to remember that not everyone thinks the way they do. The real change in the galaxy took longer to manifest, but was perhaps more important than the treaty itself. In the 5 years following the war, 17 previously conquered or enslaved species successfully won their independence. Some fought for it. Some negotiated it. But all of them were inspired by what had happened when humanity came for the Valkyrie. The threat of human intervention hung over every would-be conqueror. Not because humanity had the largest fleet or the strongest economy, but because they had proven they would actually use what they had for others. The galaxy suddenly had to consider, is this species valuable enough to risk humanity deciding they owe them a debt? On Earth, the recovery was slow and painful. The economic predictions had been accurate. Humanity had been set back decades in development. But something else had changed too. Humanity had defined itself on the galactic stage, not as conquerors or merchants, but as keepers of promises. As a species whose word meant something. Ambassador Kiho Song, who had replaced Sojin when she retired, addressed the Galactic Council 5 years after the treaty. You've asked why we would pay such a price for an old promise to a species we barely knew. Let me explain it simply. We keep our promises because that's who we are. Not who we want to be. Not who we pretend to be. Who we are. And if you think that makes us weak or naive or easy to manipulate, then you don't understand what you're looking at. He paused, looking around the chamber. We're the species that will cross the galaxy for a friend. We're the species that remembers every debt, every favor, every hand extended in friendship. We're the species that keeps promises, even when it costs everything. So I have a simple message for this council. Treat us fairly, and you'll find no more loyal ally. Save our lives when we're dying in space, and we'll remember it forever. But try to exploit us, enslave those we care about, or assume our honor is for sale. He smiled coldly, and you'll learn exactly what we're capable of when we're angry instead of grateful. The galaxy learned to take humanity seriously after that, not because they feared human weapons or human territory, but because they never quite knew what crazy thing humans might do if they believed they owed someone. 10 years after the war, Hyunwoo Nam visited Earth for the first time. He was older now, serving as the Valkyrie ambassador to humanity. He stood in front of the memorial wall, reading the names of people who had died, so his species could be free. G1, now retired but still occasionally consulted by the military, found him there. I understand your great-uncle was Thixon? She asked. Great-great-great-uncle, Hyunwoo corrected. I'm descended from his sister's line. But yes, the merchant who saved the Baekdu. Do you think he ever imagined it would lead to this?